Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're bringing down the Tuesday, December 12th slate of college basketball DFS. We've got a nice little 9-game slate on DraftKings that is going to be a little bit of a departure from what we're used to seeing on some DFS slates. We are going to break that down on why it's different and some of the best plays that you can look at for your lineups and some of the best game environments you can target for your lineups here on this 9-game Tuesday night slate. Now, if you are new to the channel, we have college basketball, college football, and NFL content coming your way weekly. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you'll be notified when new episodes drop. You can subscribe to the audio feed on Apple and Spotify or wherever else you get your podcasts as well, because we are going to have some episodes that are audio only just because just some mornings, some nights, it's easier to just, do the audio setup as opposed to breaking out the full YouTube setup. So if you're subscribed in both places, you will never miss an episode because we do have college football, college basketball, and NFL content coming your way on a weekly basis. It is bowl season now for college football, so we are going to be previewing the bowl games for this weekend before the week is over, as well as continuing to break down college basketball almost on a daily basis. All right, so taking a look at this 9-game slate, this is going to be a very interesting one. Like I said, it's a departure from what we're used to seeing in college basketball DFS. Usually, even at this point in the season with a lot of non-conference matchups, you kind of get some marquee matchups, right? Like you get a Texas Marquette or you get a UNC UConn. Well, we don't have any of that this slate. All 9 of these games are projected to be blowouts. And so I'm going to kind of refer back to something I said back in March when the NCAA tournament was going on. When you look at these like 116 games in the NCAA tournament, that's what a lot of the games on this slate are going to look like. They're going to be blowouts like a 116 NCAA tournament game, even though the teams that are doing the blowing out aren't 1 seeds. Just the talent disparity between the two teams is like a 116 matchup. So those 16 seeds, the teams that are going to get blown out tomorrow night, they're not going to get shut out. They're not going to score 0 points. They're not going to score 20 points. They're likely to score at least 50 to 60 and sometimes even 70 points. So being able to find the right guys from that game that are going to go off for those losing teams is going to be vital. And then when it comes to the winning teams in blowouts, it's always the chicken versus the egg argument. Well, if it's a blowout, obviously the guy's going to be playing less minutes because he's going to be on the bench, right? But even if he is on the bench for the last 10 minutes, what does it matter if he already put up 40 fantasy points in the first 30? So to me, being able to identify the right situations for that is going to be vital for this slate. And there's going to be some backups that get extended run who are going to go off, who are going to break the slate also. So I'm going to try to identify here on this podcast the best guys that you can target for both the winning and the losing teams, as well as some guys who might have a chance at going off if these games do turn into blowouts. So without further ado, let's go ahead and cut the intro there, and let's go ahead and get started breaking down the first game of the night. All right, so the first game of the night is going to be Monmouth taking on Seton Hall. The battle for New Jersey in this one, with both these teams being in New Jersey. Ken Palm has this one projected to be a total of Seton Hall 78 to 66. Now, Seton Hall is actually a decently predictable team. Their offense really goes through Kadari Richmond. He is their point guard. He is their best player, and he takes a lot of shots, and it shows with his outputs, right? He's the only guy on the team north of a 21% usage rate, and he's hit 38 fantasy points in 3 straight games, and his salary of only $8,800, you will take 39 fantasy points. So Kadari Richmond, definitely a guy that intrigues me, and if you're looking to play anybody from Seton Hall, he is the guy I would start with. I don't think I'm probably going to play anybody from Seton Hall as a one-off unless I'm playing Kadari Richmond as well. Now, there are a few other guys who are interesting that I do think fit as stacking partners with Richmond, the first of whom is going to be, I was looking at guards only there, Jaden Bediako, their starting center. He's had 25 fantasy points in 5 straight games, and he's a big that, I generally think that when you're looking at these blowout games, it's easier for bigs to hit value than guards, simply because, if these teams are really bad and they're missing a lot of shots, it lends itself to the bigs getting rebounds and also controlling the offensive glass if they have a size advantage as well. So I think Bediako is a solid play from Seton Hall also. Now on the Monmouth side, Monmouth has some of the best value plays on the entire slate, in my opinion. And looking at the Monmouth guys, they have just some guys that I think are going to be pretty popular. The first of whom is going to be Xander Rice. So he is their best player, and he does lead them in usage. He has over a 30% usage rate, and he's had some big games on the game log. He scored over 36 fantasy points 3 separate times at a salary of only $7,100. That's 5 times value for his salary, so we will take that any day of the week. That's upside that can win you a GPP. But the guys that I think are going to be popular are both in the 4K range. It is Jack Collins, and then I believe his first name is John Valencia. Jarrett Valencia, excuse me. Jack Collins and Jarrett Valencia. Those are going to be the two guys who are going to be super popular. Simply because when you look at the fantasy scoring, like he's averaging well over 4 times value for his salary, Jack Collins is. And, in terms of minutes, he's playing pretty much over 30 minutes every game. So you've got a guy who's out there on the floor a lot and is going to easily, outpace his salary in fantasy points. And Valencia is the same way. He averages over 20 fantasy points a game for a salary of only $4,600, plays around 26 to 30 minutes every game. Those two guys are probably going to be chalk plays here in this 9-game slate. So I kind of think that if those two guys are the chalk, it really kind of makes me want to lean into this game and say, hey, if these guys do have a ceiling game, maybe I want to pair him with Xander Rice, or maybe I want to pair him with Kadari Richmond on the other side and hope that this game stays close and all three of those guys hit value. Now, also an ownership pivot, if Collins and Valencia are going to be chalk, would be Jakari Spence of Monmouth. He's kind of their like a contributing supporting cast player, that he is a member of their starting 5 and he plays a lot of minutes. He generally doesn't see as high of a usage as Collins or Valencia, but if Collins or Valencia are having off nights, it probably means Jakari Spence is going to be putting up some fantasy points. Now, the next game of the night is Georgia Southern taking on Tennessee. This is the most lopsided projected game of the night. It is projected to be Tennessee 90-59, according to KenPom, a 31-point victory. Tennessee getting to 90 points. And if they get to 90 points, it's likely going to be through a lot of scoring from Dalton Knecht. He has came over to Tennessee as a transfer and pretty much just been a designated scorer. Like, that's what he does. However, the fact that this game might turn into a blowout does not intrigue me as much as some of the other Tennessee guys. And the main reason why is because Dalton Knecht, like I said, like all he does is score. You look at his fantasy contributions, he averages 19 real points a game and only 30.3 fantasy points a game. So he averages only 11 fantasy points a game from the other categories: rebounds, assists, blocks, and steals. That's not good. So I kind of think that, if Tennessee's going to blow this game out of the water, I would rather go with the guy who can put up stats in multiple ways, like Josiah Jordan-James, aka Triple J. He gets over 17 fantasy points a game from scoring stats, and he's got 30 fantasy points in 3 straight games. I would absolutely be wanting to play Josiah Jordan-James in this spot. Another thing that's intriguing is Zakai Ziegler, their starting point guard from last year. He had that season-ending injury last year. Well, he is now back in the starting lineup. He's played at least 27 minutes in the last 3 games. He scored at least 19 fantasy points in all 3 games. Hasn't really had a ceiling game just yet. He's really served as more of a facilitator, getting at least 4 assists in all 3 of those games. But if he ever does have a big-time scoring night, or if he gets you a few steals, that's going to lead to a big DraftKings night for Zakai Ziegler, and I could definitely see it happening sooner rather than later. The last guy on Tennessee that intrigues me is Toby Iwaka. He's their backup big man. And look, I've watched enough Tennessee over the last 2 years. I just think the guy's pretty good. Like, I think he's really talented. He can jump out the gym. He's a good rebounder and shot blocker. And when he plays extended minutes, he generally does pretty well in fantasy. You look at the Wofford game earlier in the season, he only played 14 minutes. That was a 21-point win for Tennessee. He had 22 fantasy points. Just a week ago, he played George Mason, 10 minutes, 21 fantasy points, and that was a 21-point victory for Tennessee. So if there's going to be a blowout and Toby Iwaka is going to see double-digit minutes, it probably means he's going to get some pretty, solid opportunities to score some fantasy points. And so I really think Toby Iwaka is kind of a high upside play for these Tennessee Volunteers. Now, on the Georgia Southern side, this is probably not a situation that I want to target. Tennessee's a really good defensive team. Georgia Southern's only projected to score 59 points. It's just not really a great situation to target. And I think DraftKings did not do us any favors with any of the pricing. I don't think any of these guys are underpriced. These guys don't, this team's not very good. So that they don't really score a whole lot of points anyway. I just don't think it's a great situation. Their core guys right now are Tyron Moore, Avante Parker, Aaron Banks, and then Deuce Dean. Those are kind of their 4 guys that are their guys right now. I'm not really interested in any of them, but if I was going to play any of them, it'd be one of the guys who's starting and playing big time minutes for them. And they are all under $6,000, so I guess they have that going for them. But I'm just not super interested in this Georgia Southern side. All right, now taking a look at game number 3, we got Hofstra at Duke. This one, KenPom has projected to be Duke 80-66. Now, Duke is very interesting because right now Tyrese Proctor is dealing with an ankle injury. And I do not see a reason for them to rush him back. Duke played my school, UNC Charlotte, on Saturday, so I got to watch all of that game, and they really seemed kind of just fine without Tyrese Proctor. In fact, they only played 6 guys more than 7 minutes in that game. The obvious name like Kyle Filipowski, but then at the guard spots, it was Roach, McCain, Foster, and Blakes, and then really Mark Mitchell was really the only other guy that played, and he kind of played, that 4 or 5 spot alongside Filipowski. And if Mitchell wasn't in, they just went small. But I really think that if Proctor is out, you're going to see big time boosts from all 4 of those Duke guards: Roach, McCain, Foster, and Blakes. And if this game turns into a blowout, I could definitely see all 4 of them hitting value. Like, all 4 of them had really solid outputs against UNC Charlotte. Jeremy Roach had over 31 fantasy points. Jared McCain had over 30 fantasy points. Caleb Foster only had 15, but that's not bad for a guy who's only $4,600. And then Jalen Blakes had 21 fantasy points in that Charlotte game. So all 4 of those guys I think are going to be interesting as long as Tyrese Proctor continues to be out. Also, Hofstra only plays 1 guy in their lineup that is taller than 6'8". Kyle Filipowski has a chance to have an absolute field day. He was not very efficient against Charlotte, but the usage numbers were there. He grabbed 13 boards. He got a block and a steal. So if Kyle Filipowski is able to have a more efficient scoring night, then I could definitely see him having a big-time fantasy night against Hofstra. Now, on the Hofstra side, they do only play 1 guy above 6'8", and that is Jaco Fritz. I'm assuming it's pronounced Jaco. Maybe it's Jocko or Jacko, but I'm assuming it's pronounced Jaco. Jaco Fritz is their really only bit of size that they have. He can really get himself in foul trouble, though. He's fouled out of 2 games already so far this season. So if Filipowski is drawing those fouls, it means he's going to head to the bench pretty quick and have an even bigger size mismatch over the Hofstra backup bigs. The only other 2 guys that I'm really interested in for Hofstra would be Thomas and Dubar. These 2 guys are just usage monsters. They've been on slates before, and they've done us really well. And I think they have an incredibly high ceiling because if Hofstra does, in fact, keep this game close, who's going to be keeping it close. It's going to be Thomas and Dubar. So I definitely don't mind going to one of those 2 guys. No matter how many Duke guys I'm playing, even if I end up playing 2 or 3 Duke guys, I'm definitely okay going with Thomas or Dubar on the Hofstra side. I think if I were to play Jaco Fritz, I would probably not play Kyle Filipowski because I think if Fritz is in the game, that means he's not fouling, and that means that Filipowski is probably not having a good game. So I don't think that's a very correlated play. If you play Filipowski, you definitely want to avoid Jaco Fritz. Next up, we've got the Tennessee Martin at NC State game. This one is pretty darn interesting because both these teams play at a very fast tempo. This has the highest game total of the night. KenPom has it projected to be NC State 91-73. NC State is 60th in the nation in adjusted tempo, and UT Martin ranks 7th. So these 2 teams are going to get up and down, and they're going to score points. Tennessee Martin has a very undersized roster, so I definitely think that NC State can take advantage of that with their big fella DJ Burns. And I can't say this enough on the podcast. If you've never watched DJ Burns play, just watch one game. Like, he's a very entertaining college basketball player to watch. I love how he carries himself on the floor. He has fun playing basketball. He's got a unique body type for his position, and he's really good with his footwork. He's really good with his touch around the rim. He's just a really good watch. And I think against an undersized Tennessee Martin team, DJ Burns could be in line for a big-time game. And then at the guard spot, we've seen Jaden Taylor and DJ Horn. They're kind of the 2 lead guards for NC State. Both of those guys should be in line for, a big game as well. If NC State's going to get to 90 points, then it probably means that Taylor and Horn are going to hit value. Mohamed Diarra is a guy for NC State who's almost like a designated rebounder. He averages more rebounds than points. In fact, he even grabbed 18 boards against Boston College 2 games ago. If he plays a lot of minutes, he's going to get a lot of fantasy points just because of how good of a rebounder he is and how good of, how high of a rate he rebounds. But you never really know how many minutes he's going to play. So he's a little bit of a high risk, high reward play. Another 2 guys that I do like for NC State, though, that I think are a little bit high risk, high reward. Again, these are more GPP type plays in DFS. Dennis Parker Jr. is $5,400. He is a freshman. He is very much on the rise for NC State. He's had a 36 fantasy point and a 27 fantasy point game so far this season. So he's definitely got a lot of upside for you there. And then there's also MJ Rice, who's only $3,800, played 10 minutes in their last game and put up 18.5 fantasy points. Yeah, 18.5 fantasy points in 10 minutes is pretty darn impressive, especially for a guard. I definitely think MJ Rice has a lot of upside. If he ends up playing 15, 20 minutes in this game, I could definitely see him having a big time night at only $3,800 on DraftKings. Now on the Tennessee Martin side, like this is a team where of all the teams that are getting blown out, like they have the highest projected total at 73. So I definitely think this is a team that you can target and you can get guys from. One thing to note though, Issa Muhammad is their starting center. He did not play in their last game. And I cannot find any update on the internet as to why he did not play or his status for this game. So just be aware of that. He's at $5,500. His fantasy points per game looks insane compared to his price tag, but he did not play in their last game. And so definitely be aware of that. As we head into closer to tip off for this one, if you can find an update that he's playing, I definitely think he's in play. Now, the other two guys, excuse me, I forgot to mention, in his place, they started a young big guy, David Kamwanga. Didn't really do much with it. 16 minutes in their last game, 10.25 fantasy points. So not great, but he did start at center for them with Issa Muhammad out. Now the other two guys that I'm pretty much guaranteed to get a lot of usage from this UT Martin side are Jordan Sears and Jacob Cruz. They both fill up the stat sheet with a lot more than scoring. And if UT Martin is going to keep this game remotely close, it's probably going to be because of those two having a big night. And they're very reasonably priced, both average almost 5 times their salary. So I definitely think they're a very reasonable get for these Tennessee Martin guys. Now, the next game and the last game before we're going to take a little breather is going to be Alcorn State taking on Maryland. Ken Pom has this one projected to be Maryland 80-62. Now, Maryland, I won the quarter arcade last Wednesday night by playing two Maryland guys, Julian Reese and Jameer Young. And I'm not saying that that's going to be a strategy that is going to win, a GPP again on this slate, but it's a strategy that I'm going to go back to because with Maryland, it's quite simple. Everything they do revolves around Julian Reese and Jameer Young. And so if Maryland is going to be scoring 80 points like Ken Pom projects them to, then Julian Reese and Jameer Young are going to be the guys that get them there. And I think they're very stackable together because Julian Reese is a big man who is a double-double machine. Jameer Young is not going to go down there and get rebounds. He is a distributing and scoring guard. So I think they're not really competing with each other for the same stats. A lot of Young's assists are going to go to Reese. A lot of Reese's rebounds are going to be outletted right to Young. I think it's a very complementary duo that is not like cheap by any stretch of the imagination. They're very expensive at a combined salary of $18,100. But I definitely think that's a stack you can make. And if Maryland gets to 80 points, just go ahead and plug in 80 fantasy points from those two guys right now. Now, for the rest of the Maryland guys, if this game turns into a blowout, you're going to see minutes from some of the lower guys. Freshman Jamie Kaiser Jr., that is a guy that they really like out there in College Park. In their last game against Penn State, he played 28 minutes, which was his season high, had 22 fantasy points, which was his season high. So I think he's a guy that's on the rise who could see a boost if this game turns into a blowout. And he's probably the only guy other than Reese and Young that I'm going to get to from Maryland here on this slate. Now, for Alcorn State, they're pretty interesting because they run everything through two guys, and that is Jeremiah Kendall and Byron Joshua. But Kendall looks like a heck of a lot better fantasy option just from the fantasy points per game. Kendall is their leading fantasy scorer, and it's because he scores a lot and he gets a lot of rebounds. He is very efficient, shooting over 50% from the field on the season. Byron Joshua is not efficient from the field. He's shooting about 30% from the field on the season, but you look at his shot numbers, he continues to get shot after shot after shot. And if this team is going to score any kind of points against Maryland, you got to figure Byron Joshua is going to be the one shooting it. And if he does happen to have a hot shooting night, then he could be a guy that you could go to. And one thing I like about both those guys is both those guys play heavy minutes, even in blowout losses. Both those guys get plenty of shots, even in blowout losses. So Kendall and Joshua would be the two that I would look at for Alcorn State. And I'm really not considering any other guys from that squad. All right, that does it for the first 5 games of the slate. So let's go ahead and take ourselves a little breather, and then we're going to talk about the last 4. All right, so I do want to mention before we get started with these last games that there are places where you can find more information from me. Keep in mind this episode, I'm sitting here recording it at, 10:30 at night on Monday, and, the slate doesn't tip off until 7 p.m. on Tuesday. So there's going to be more information that I'm going to deep dive. There's going to be more plays that I'm going to uncover. There's going to be guys that I might change my opinion on about in the next 21 hours. So if you do want more from me, there are a few places where you can get more information. First off, follow me on Twitter, I guess X now, at Mike's Money Picks. I tweet out the DFS rundown for every college basketball slate and college football slate. If there's ever any injury news or anything like that, or any updates on the podcast, I generally try to tweet those out and get those out to you guys. So it'll be helpful if you give me that follow. And then I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube and on the audio feed. I cannot recommend that enough. Part of the fun of DFS is talking about it with others and playing it with others. And it's 100% free. And we get a lot of good conversation, bouncing ideas off each other. And there's a lot of smart people in there who've won a lot of money in recent weeks. And so get yourself in the Fantasy Corner Discord if you want more ideas and more help on, college basketball DFS, college football DFS, NBA DFS, NFL DFS. We got every sport covered in there and a lot of smart people who talk about it. And then lastly, I do write a full article on my Patreon for every college basketball slate where I break down my core plays as well as kind of my attack strategy for the slate. I'm not going to sit here and guarantee that, you can just plug in that core and instantly win GPPs. That's not exactly how it works. I wish it was. But what I can promise is that you can read those every day, get yourself some additional information, get yourself some strategies and some ideas that you might not have thought of yourself. There's not a whole lot of people who break down college basketball and college football DFS like I do. And so that is why I would recommend that if you do want to read those full articles, it is on the Patreon. And lastly, if you do want to try something new this college basketball season, head on over to signupexpert.com/Mike's Picks. What Sign Up Expert does is they get you the best offers and promo codes for new users on any DFS player prop or sportsbook site. So if you're looking to try something new, maybe you want to try player props on Underdog, maybe you want to open up an account to do sportsbook, signupexpert.com/Mike's Picks is the place to go. All right, now let's go ahead and break down these last 4 games. So the next one is going to be IUPUI taking on Minnesota, which I learned when I was in Indianapolis for the NCAA tournament a few years back. Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis is the acronym for IUPUI, which is a mess, much like their basketball team. It's a mess. So this game is projected to be Minnesota 80-59. IUPUI, tied for the lowest team total of the slate with who was it earlier? Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern and IUPUI are tied for the lowest total of the slate. Now, on the Minnesota side, we've got something interesting to break down. Dawson Garcia is their best player, and he is likely to be out for this game against IUPUI. Pharrell Payne is their backup big man behind Dawson Garcia. He's pretty good, and he's also likely to be out for this game. He was limited at Monday's practice due to a groin injury. I would tend to think that they would hold him out, in my opinion. Now, if he does end up playing, it wouldn't shock me, but it just seems like a game where you could hold him out and you'd be okay. Now, if both those guys are out, their normal third center, Jack Wilson, missed their last game also, so he could also be out. And so in their last game, with Garcia out, Wilson out, Payne hobbled, you saw a lot of minutes for Isaiah Enan, Joshua Ola-Joseph, and Parker Fox. Between the three of them, Enan really showed me something in that game against Florida Gulf Coast. He only played 17 minutes, and he put up 28.25 fantasy points. That's nothing to sneeze at. And then Parker Fox in that game, he's only $4,100. Parker Fox in that game played 23 minutes and put up 23 fantasy points. So definitely 2 guys that I think you can go with if we get news on Garcia, Payne, and Wilson. Enan and Parker Fox have a lot of interest from me. Now, what we've also seen in the last 1.5 or so games that Dawson Garcia has missed, you have seen really boosted usage from Elijah Hawkins, who had 40 fantasy points in that game against Nebraska. And you've also seen more usage from Braden Carrington, who put up 29.75 fantasy points in that game against Nebraska, and then didn't really do much at all against Florida Gulf Coast. So I definitely think that those Minnesota guys, with Dawson Garcia out, you're going to see some big numbers from some Minnesota guy. I don't know exactly who it's going to be because I don't know the status of Payne and Wilson, but somebody from Minnesota is going to be putting up points in bunches against IUPUI. And the reason for that is because IUPUI is not very good. They are in the bottom, bottom tier in KenPom. They're in the 300s. Now, for this team, Jaywan Counter is their best player. He actually has a decent fantasy average for his salary. He takes a lot of shots. He is their usage leader. I don't mind it. If you think that this game stays remotely close, he might be worth playing. And he's kind of shown the ability to hit value even in blowouts. Like the Northern Kentucky game, they only scored 55 points and he had 28 fantasy points. So I definitely think that it's a possibility that Jalen Counter has a decent game. But there are two values that I like for this team, Bryce Monroe and DJ Jackson. Bryce Monroe is only $4,100 and averages over 16 fantasy points per game. That's over 4 times value. And you look at his game log, he gets double-digit shots more often than he does not, and he generally plays almost 30 minutes a game. So I'm really intrigued by Bryce Monroe. I think he's a really solid value play, and he's shown the ability to hit value even when they get blown out. And then DJ Jackson is a guard that comes off the bench who, kind of like Bryce Monroe, has shown us some upside as well. He gets a lot of shots. He plays a decent amount of minutes, and he's shown us his ceiling with a 32.5 fantasy point performance earlier this year. So I definitely think DJ Jackson and Bryce Monroe are going to be guys who make my player pool, just because you got to find some cheap guys here in this slate if you want to play a lot of expensive ones. Next up is going to be Coppin State taking on Georgetown. Now, let me tell you, Coppin State, if you thought IUPUI was a mess, just take a look at Coppin State, and we'll get to it. We're going to break down Georgetown first, because Georgetown is projected to win this game 77-60. The good news about Georgetown is they're pretty darn easy to predict at this point in the season. Jaden Epps is their point guard. He leads them in usage, and he plays nearly every minute of every game. Dontrez Styles is their wing transfer from UNC, who also plays almost every minute from every game. He's had some big-time fantasy performances. I would be considering both of them for my lineups pretty substantially tomorrow night. Supreme Cook has been a guy who has dominated against a weaker competition. He generally has cleaned up in games where Georgetown has played against worse teams. So with Coppin State being a bad team, Supreme Cook is a guy who I will be considering also. But I would rather play Ismail Massoud than Supreme Cook. Massoud is a transfer from Kansas State. He has only played in 3 games. He's played over 30 minutes in all of them. He's put up over 22 fantasy points in all of them, with a ceiling of a 42 fantasy point performance against TCU. I really like Massoud. With that salary and that ceiling, I think that's a good combination, and I think he's going to be able to go out and play well against this Coppin State team. Another interesting trend that you're starting to see, Jay Heath is starting to overtake the minutes and the usage of Rowan Brumbaugh. So I would probably keep my Georgetown player pool to just those guys, Cook, Epps, Styles, Massoud, and then maybe Heath, with Massoud probably being my favorite guy out of the bunch. Now, on the Coppin State side, I can't find any kind of news about this team. About all I have is the box scores and what they have on KenPom. And this is a mess, because looking at DraftKings, Justin Watson and Toto Fagbenley are their starting front court. And they are very reasonably priced for what they do from a fantasy perspective, but they're listed as out on DraftKings. And I'll be honest, I can't figure out why, because both these guys played in their last game. In fact, they played pretty well in their last game, if I must say so, and they're listed as out, and I can't find anything on the internet about a suspension or an injury or otherwise. And so I'm going to kind of go by the fact that if they played their last game, they're probably going to play this one. But granted, if that word out next to their player card scares you, I get it. Like, you don't have to play either of these guys. I would wait to see if I can find some sort of news on these guys before I play them, because I don't know why DraftKings lists them as out. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, they are Coppin State starting front court, and they're their 2 best players, if I'm being honest. And Coppin State plays a pretty short rotation. They've got a lot of other guys that are injured as well. If you look at KenPom gives you a pretty good picture of who is injured and who's playing and who's not. In their most recent game, Coppin State only played 7 guys double-digit minutes. Winston and Fagbenley were 2 of them. The other 5 were Spurlock, Archie, Munir Jones, who is the Stone Min on DraftKings. He hasn't done much of anything this season. Ferguson, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Tekepchich. So there you have it. The 7 guys that played double-digit minutes for Coppin State were Fagbenley, Winston, Spurlock, Archie, Munir Jones, Ferguson, and Tekepchich. Now, of that group, Spurlock and Archie are the other 2 I would consider. Spurlock is a really interesting one because he has had pretty consistent fantasy performances ever since about like their last 5 games. And he consistently plays a big time minute total, whether they are losing, winning, getting blown out, whatever. Spurlock is going to be out there playing minutes, and he's going to be getting shots as well. And then Archie is a guy that, has seen his minutes, ride the roller coaster this season. But when he's out there, he generally takes a lot of shots. And in their last game against George Washington, he took 18 of them. So if you're going to give me 18 shots against Georgetown for a guy that's only $4,400, that's a pretty reasonable salary for a guy who has plenty of opportunity to hit that salary. So those would be guys that I would consider for Coppin State. But with this team being just as much of a mess as they are, as many guys on this, DraftKings list that are, not playing minutes, I think you can avoid them altogether if you don't want to deal with that mess. The next game is going to be Oral Roberts taking on Texas Tech. So this one is projected to be Texas Tech 77-64. These last two games of the night are actually projected to be the two closest games of the slate. So if you're looking for, kind of normal, quote unquote, workloads for some of these guys, then these will be the two games that you would target. Now for Texas Tech, Devin Cambridge is out for the season. So you will likely see a boost. He's listed as a forward on DraftKings, but he's kind of more of a wing. So you're going to kind of see more of minutes and boost for Toussaint and Darion Williams and Pop Isaacs. But I really think that you're going to see the biggest bump to Kerwin Walton. So Cambridge got hurt in the first half of their last game. And in that game, Kerwin Walton ended up playing 28 minutes. He ended up with 33.75 fantasy points. Now, the only thing that was a little bit concerning was the fact that he doesn't do a whole lot else outside of score. But hey, if he's going to go in and he's going to score you 20 points, and you kind of can't complain at a salary of only $5,200. So I do think he is a very intriguing play. Chance McMillian is another guy who can kind of replace a little bit of Cambridge's production. He's another wing. His fantasy outputs have been super duper inconsistent with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 37.75. But he's a guy that, can kind of play that similar role that Cambridge had. And I definitely think he is intriguing at only $4,700. Now, Oral Roberts is really interesting. Gone are the days of Max Asmus and them just pushing the ball up the court and Max Asmus chucking up a lot of shots. But their second best guy last year, Isaac McBride, is back. And Isaac McBride and Kareem Thompson have a stat oddity that I didn't think I would ever see. Isaac McBride and Kareem Thompson average over 40 minutes per game. Yes, you heard that correct. They average over 40 minutes per game. They played one overtime game against Kansas State, and they did not come out in that game. And so they got 5 extra minutes, and they haven't sat 5 minutes the entire year. It's wild. It is truly crazy. So with those two guys, you're going to get guys that are guaranteed to be out on the floor. And they don't get in foul trouble because they can't afford to. So those two guys, I think you've got pretty safe fantasy productions from with McBride and Kareem Thompson. And I think that makes them appealing as well. Another guy who joined the 40-minute club recently was Deshang Weaver. He played all 40 minutes in their most recent win against Tulsa. And he had 28 fantasy points in that game. He's another guy that, hey, if he's going to be out there for all 40 minutes, it's kind of worth giving them a look, right? Because you're just going to get more opportunities to rack up fantasy points than literally anybody else on the slate. Now, if Weaver were to ever get in foul trouble, their backup big is Sir Isaac Heron, which sounds like a British royalty, but I don't know if he is or not. Sir Isaac Heron is a guy that has seen his minutes go up and down, but if he does end up playing big minutes, he can give you a decent fantasy output. He's had over 15 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. Now, the last game of the night is going to be California Baptist taking on Oregon. This game is projected to be Oregon 78-65. Now, what you have seen recently from Oregon is a really kind of a takeover from Jermaine Couisnard. And so Couisnard has really seen his usage increase a lot because of the injuries to Nafali Dante and Nate Biddle. And so Couisnard's really, kind of taken over with a lot of the offensive scoring load, whereas Kwame Evans Jr. has taken over with a lot of the rebounding and kind of the rim protection and the dirty work that used to fall to Nafali Dante. So I think both those guys have to be in play for that reason as well. Keyshawn Bartholomew is a guy who has a high ceiling. He's certainly worth playing, even though it's been kind of up and down so far this season in terms of what you're going to get from him. The other guy that interests me from Oregon is one of their young guys, Jackson Shellstad. He is only $5,100 on DraftKings. He has played 4 games. He's seen his minutes increase each game. He started their last game against UTEP, put up 17 fantasy points, which is not great. But if he does end up having a big game, then I definitely think the possibility is there for Shellstat. Rigsby is also a guy that we have played a few times, but I kind of think he's seeing his minutes go a little bit to Shellstad, so I'm not exactly super intrigued on that, but his price tag's only $4,100, and with him being kind of a younger guy, you got to feel like he'd be a favorite to get boosted minutes if this game does in fact turn into a blowout. Now for Cal Baptist, they really are kind of a predictable team. They kind of play all five of their starters a lot of minutes, but they've definitely rotated this starting lineup quite a bit. The guys that you can depend on, Dominique Daniels is their leader in usage at $6,000. He averages over 17 points per game, and he gets you some assists as well. He takes a lot of shots, so I definitely think he has a chance to be a pretty solid value play if California Baptist is able to keep this close. And then you've got Ivan Uidrago. Ivan Uidrago. Kind of sounds like the name of the Rocky IV villain. But anyway, he has massive offensive and defensive rebounding rates. And with Oregon being without Nafali Dante and Nate Biddle down low, you got to feel like Uidrago has a chance to have a pretty good performance, right? And he's had 23 fantasy points in 3 straight games. He's shown a ceiling of 37 fantasy points so far this season. And if he does manage to get you that double-double, he's going to be a guy that you're going to want in your lineups. After him, Hunter Goodrick is a guy who plays quite a bit of minutes and, kind of fills up the stat sheet in a variety of ways. Uidrago actually has better rates than him, though. Goodrick just plays a little more minutes. He's a little more of a scorer. So I think one of those two guys could definitely be in line for a decent night. I don't think I would be playing more than one of them in the same lineup, though. But those are really the main guys from Cal Baptist that I'm looking into. All right, so that does it for this Tuesday night slate, and that does it for this episode, y'all. So hopefully I was able to give you guys plenty of information that you can use to help fill out those DFS lineups Tuesday night. Hopefully gave you guys plenty of names, plenty of guys that you can look for, and get some winners here and get you guys some money there on DraftKings on this Tuesday night slate. Now again, if you want more from me, remember you can follow me on X at Mike's Money Picks. Join the Fantasy Corner Discord. I promise it's a great time in there. It really is part of the fun of DFS is having fun with others, and that's a great way to do so. And then there's also the articles on the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. And that does it for this episode, guys. So make sure that if you like what you're seeing, hit the like button on YouTube, rate and review the audio feed. I don't just say that lightly. It really does help me out a lot. And hit that subscribe button. We're closing in on 250 subscribers on YouTube, and you will be notified when all of our new episodes drop, like our episodes for all the college football bowl season, all the college basketball content we do weekly, and NFL weekly as well. So hit that subscribe button. You will not be disappointed. All right, that does it for the Tuesday night slate. So hopefully I was able to give you guys some good information. It's going to help you guys on Tuesday. Remember, we will be back later on in the week for more college basketball as well as college football bowl season. Thank you guys for watching and listening at this point, and I will see you next time.